Plastering. In this movie, we'll take a detailed look at the plastering section of the NHE Plus. Usually, pricing up the plastering for a job is quite intense. There are so many things to take into account. Render beads, corner beads, the labour, sand, cement, plaster, to name but a few. But when we arrive at the plastering section, in our NHE Plus, we can see that almost all of the work is done for us. The programme's brought together all of the details from the previous pricing sections that we've completed and accurately worked out what we'll need. It's taken into account the type of wall construction and the area of it for all external, internal, perimeter and studwork walls. It's done the same with our flooring and ceilings. Better still, it's broken this down and the whole section is laid out in a way that's easy to understand. We can view, check and if necessary fine-tune all the details. Let's start at the top and work our way down. Gang rates. All of the labour costs for our plastering will be based on the gang that is entered into this form. The default setting is 2 plasterers and 1 labourer. We can adjust this if we want. We can select a different tradesperson in the drop-down menu, and we can change the quantity of people from each trade that's selected. It's important to remember that we must leave at least 1 tradesperson in this form. If we don't, then no one will be allocated to carry out the plastering, and the NHE Plus won't be able to calculate the labour costs for us. We can click the blue info icons and view further details on how the gang rates are worked and used. Or we can view the detailed movie section in the roof tiling movie section. Internal walls. The first subsection in the plastering deals with all the plastering requirements for our internal walls. We'll notice that this is broken down further into internal walls to new walls and internal walls to existing walls. We'll begin by looking at the plastering for the internal walls to new walls section. The NHE Plus has worked out the area for all of our internal new walls. So this includes the internal masonry perimeter and partition walls and any timber perimeter and partition walls. The first thing we need to do is tell the programme the type of plastering we will be doing for each of our internal wall sections. It's really easy. We click on this thumbnail picture here. We're provided with a straightforward pictorial form. Each section and type of wall is dealt with independently. This gives us so much flexibility. OK, we're looking at the plastering options for our main walls. We know these are the options for our main wall section because the main walls button is highlighted. Each section of this form works in the same way. Here we can see the area of coverage required for the internal side, or in our case, internal leaf, of our main walls. We're also given a visual reminder of the wall type. Our internal leaf is block. We can then see the different plastering methods that we could select for this section. There are 7 in total. By default, it is set on render and set, but we can adjust this in our master file if our usual method is something different. The render and set is a sand and cement scratch coat, a second coat of sand and cement, and a plaster finish. We could opt for dot and dab plaster. So this is plasterboard stuck with an adhesive and a plaster finish. There's dot and dab tape and paste, so plasterboard stuck with adhesive again, but with tape on the joints. We do have a hard wall option. If we were putting a coat of hard wall, then a skim coat of plaster, we would tick this box. The no render option may be something we select if we're doing a garage. We have 2 dry lining options. If we select dry lining plaster, the programme will allow for battens being fixed to the wall, plasterboard and a plaster finish. If we choose the dry lining tape and paste method, again the battens and plasterboard are calculated as well as the tape for the joints. The most complicated thing that we need to do here is make our choice by ticking the box. When we tick the box, the programme will calculate everything for that area of wall based on the method of plastering that we've chosen. We are doing render and set, so we will make sure that it's ticked. The first floor walls are here. We can see the title that we entered earlier above the Section 2 option. Exactly the same choices are available to us. We have a visual reference showing us what the wall will be constructed of. In our job it's blockwork. We can see the area in square metres. Now we just tick the option we will be using on the internal leaf of our first floor walls. This will be render and set again. We didn't enter any more additional walls earlier in the pricing sheet, so we can see that no area of wall is allowed in Section 3 or Section 4 of this form. Our job also doesn't have a plinth, so again, nothing is allowed for in here. We'll now click the Partitions timber. We do have some timber partition walls. We can see the area here. We're provided with 2 options in our timber partition walls, these being plaster, so plasterboard with a plaster finish, or dry lining, so plasterboard with tape on the joints. The The blue text here tells us that the plasterboard for these is being allowed for in the first fixed carpentry section of our pricing sheet. Only the finish for the timber partition walls will be allowed for in our plastering section. We'll be plastering our partition walls, so we'll leave that option ticked. The final section in this form is partitions masonry. We have the 7 options that we looked at earlier to choose from. Here we can see the area. This is allowing for both sides of these partition walls. We will be using the render and set method on these walls too. When the form's set to our preferences, we click Enter Details. The NHE Plus will instantly work out all of the details for each section of wall based on our choices. We do have a red box in this subsection. We need to tell the programme the number of external corners that are inside the structure. We can click the question mark for a visual reference. The text here tells us that if we have multiple floors, we need to ensure that all external corners from all floors are entered. We have 3 external corners inside our structure on the first floor. We can view the area for each wall type here. The programme has worked this out for us, so they're in white boxes. So we've got the internal masonry perimeter walls, internal masonry partition walls. We don't have any internal timber perimeter walls, so there's no area in this box. The area of internal timber partition wall is shown here. And here is the total area of new internal walls that will be finished. We can click this thumbnail to view a plastering report if we want. OK, so the information for internal walls, new walls is worked out. We just told the programme the method of plastering we would be using and entered in the number of external corners inside the structure. We are pricing a new 5-bedroom house, so we don't have any existing internal walls to deal with. But if we did, for example, if we were building an extension, we may need to use the internal walls to existing walls subsection. Like this picture shows, in the blue highlight, there may be an area of existing wall that will require plastering. We can allow for any areas like this in this subsection. It works in a very similar way to the subsection we've just looked at. First, click the thumbnail picture. The programme's got no way of knowing what type of wall our existing wall is, so we need to tell it by clicking on the relevant picture, so masonry or timber frame. We'll click masonry first. OK, we're provided with 7 different options. We just click the option that we will be doing. Just to show you, let's click the thumbnail again. We'll click the timber frame option this time. So we've got 2 choices, plaster or dry line. We just click the one we want. When we've told the programme the type of wall and plastering method we will be doing, we just enter the length of the existing wall to be plastered and the height of the existing internal wall to be plastered. The NHE Plus works out the area and all of the items, hours and costs that will be involved with plastering this existing internal wall. As mentioned, we don't have any existing internal walls, so we will just remove the information from the blue boxes. Internal wall items. All of the items that we'll need for the plastering on our internal walls are worked out here. We're pricing a new build, so we're not plastering any existing internal walls. The items that are shown here have been worked out for us based on the information that we looked at in the previous movie section. Let's start at the top and work our way down. The labour for the cement, render and plaster finish, or render and set, that we've selected for the majority of our new internal walls is here. We can see the number of hours allocated to the task and the cost. Let's click the question mark. We do have the option to change the thickness of the render in here if we wish. The quantities of sand and cement are calculated based on this thickness. If we want to change this, just type the preferred thickness into this box. Everything adjusts accordingly. The sand is here. We can see the cost, and the blue text tells us the labour and hours have been allowed above. If we click the question mark, we can adjust how the sand is rounded up for ordering purposes. The programme works out all the cubic metres of sand that will be required, then converts them into tonnes. If we click the blue info icon, we can view more details. Here we can see the quantity of sand required. If we click the question mark, let's change this and ask the programme to round the sand up to the nearest tonne. See? The programme will automatically change the sand requirements based on what we've entered. The cement's here. OK, we can click this icon to see information on how the programme is calculating the cement. We've also got the option to change the type of cement that we'll be using in this drop-down menu. The mix is here. By default, it's 6-in-1. If we adjust this to, say, a 3-in-1, the number of bags of cement that we will need instantly changes to allow for a 3-in-1 mix. We'll just change this back to the 6-in-1. Again, the blue text tells us that the labour for the cement is allowed above. We haven't selected a hard wall finish for any of our internal new walls. But if we had, all of the costs and quantities would be here. We could adjust the material in the drop-down. If we click on the question mark, we can see the default setting for the area that a bag of hardwall will cover. This is in a yellow box, so we can adjust it if we want. Corner beads are automatically worked out. If we click the question mark, the blue text explains that the programme is working out the corner beads for around our doors, windows, any other openings, and any external corners. We can adjust the material in the drop-down. We'll notice that the quantity required is based on the length of the corner bead that is selected. We'll just click the magnifying glass. If we select this corner bead, it's a different length. The programme will take this into account and recalculate the number of lengths that we will need if we're using this corner bead. Stop beads are here. Again, these are automatically worked out for us. We'll notice that the quantity required is in a yellow box. It may be that in certain areas, stop beads won't be needed. Or we might want to change the quantity that's been automatically worked out. We would just adjust the number of lengths that have been automatically worked out for us by typing in this box. We can, if we wish, switch both the corner and stop beads off like this. We do want both of these, so we'll just switch them back on. Here are our cement additives. We can see the amount needed. If we click the question mark, we can view how it's being worked out and adjust it if we want. The plaster is all calculated. Here is the quantity of bags we'll need for our internal walls. OK, we can see that the calculation for the amount of plaster we will need is based on each bag of plaster covering an area of 9 square metres. Let's change this to 7. Enter the details. See, the quantity of plaster required changes to allow for this. We'll just change that back to 9. Also in this form, we can view a summary of the plastering. We're shown the total area of wall that will be plastered, as well as a breakdown of the area that will be plastered on each individual internal wall section. So we've got the section name, the area, and a reminder of the plastering method that will be used. We can adjust the type of plaster being used here in the yellow drop-down menu. Plasterboard is next. We can see that no plasterboard is allowed here. Let's click the question mark. We are doing render and set on our masonry walls, so plasterboard isn't required. The blue text explains that the plasterboard for our studwork walls is accounted for in the first fix carpentry. Plasterboard that's accounted for here in the plastering section will be for masonry walls. So if we had selected a dot and dab option on our masonry walls, the plasterboard for it would have been here. This is because the programme knows that if this method was used, then the plasterers would be carrying it out. Therefore, it would be allowed for in the plastering section. Whereas the plasterboarding on the timber partition walls or studwork would be done by the carpenters in the first fix. Therefore, it's accounted for there, as we saw in the first fix carpentry movie. If we had chosen a plastering option that needed jointing tape, this would have been worked out here. The programme knows we don't need any, so it's not calculated anything for us. It's also not allowed for any taping paste. If we click the taping paste question mark, we can see how the programme would go about calculating this. If this was an option that was being used, we could change the way the programme worked it out. Again, it's not something we'll need, but if it was, the costs and quantities would be shown here. We'd also have the option to view and adjust how the NHE Plus was working it out. If we were battening out any new or existing walls, it would be here. If we click the question mark, we can see the centres for the battens. This is in a yellow box, so it can be changed. We don't have any battens, but if we did, insulation would be here. We could switch this off if we wanted and adjust the insulation material in the drop-down menu. Again, due to the selection we have made on our internal wall plastering, skim beads aren't calculated. But if they were required, they would be allowed for, and we would have the option to switch them off. Scrim tape, to reinforce the joints of our plasterboard, is worked out. If we click the question mark, we can view how it's being calculated. The blue text provides lots of further details, and we can change the dimensions of the plasterboard in here too. We do have plasterboard on our internal timber partition walls. The plasterboard, as mentioned, is in the first fix carpentry, but the scrim tape is allowed for here. The fixings for our plasterboard are also in the second fix carpentry. If we were plasterboarding any of the internal masonry walls, or if we had any internal perimeter walls that were being plasterboarded, then the fixings for that plasterboard would be worked out. We can click the question mark, see how the programme's calculating, and adjust it if necessary. Any fixings for battens would be here. Again, just click the question mark, see how the programme's calculating them. If rule plugs are needed, they're worked out based on 1 per batten fixing. Okay, so as we can see, all of the items that we will need for the plastering of any internal walls, whether they're new or existing, are worked out. The programme looks at the information we entered at the top of this subsection and calculates everything we'll need. We just check, and if necessary, fine-tune the details. External walls. Okay, as we've seen, the plastering section of our pricing sheet is broken down into sections. This gives us lots of flexibility. We're going to look at the external walls subsection of our plastering. We're pricing a new build. It's a 5-bedroom house. All of the external walls are new and they're a brickwork construction. We'll notice that at the top of the external option, we can allow for plastering to new external walls and existing external walls. We'll begin by looking at the options for the new external walls. We're not actually going to be doing any plastering to the new external walls on our job, but we will take a look at how this works. It's really straightforward. We click the thumbnail at the top. We're provided with an easy-to-understand pictorial form. Each section and type of wall is dealt with independently. Okay, so we're looking at the plastering options for our walls below DPC. We know these are the options for our walls below DPC because the Below DPC button is highlighted. Each section of this form works in the same way. Here, we can see the area of coverage required for the external walls below DPC. We're also given a visual reminder of the wall type. We then use the tick box option to tell the programme if we do or don't require plastering on this section of wall. We don't want to plaster our walls below DPC. We tick this box. Let's look at the main walls. We click the main section button. Again, we can see the area of our main external walls. They're also being constructed of brick. We will tell the programme that we do not want to plaster these and tick the box. We'll look at our first floor walls now. We click section 2. Here's the area. Brickwork again. We're going to say that we want to plaster these first floor walls. We'll tick that box. We don't have any walls in the third or fourth sections, and we don't have a plinth. But if we did, we would literally just click the button to open the form for that section and simply tell the programme if we did or didn't want to plaster that area. It's so simple. Now we've got this set how we want it, we just switch the plastering for external wall options on by clicking this box. Instantly, everything that we would need to plaster our first floor walls is worked out. Just to show you, if we go back in the form and tell the programme that we want to also plaster our main walls, enter the details, see, it automatically works this out for us. We'll just reset that to plastering our first floor walls only. We are doing a new build and there are no existing external walls to deal with. But if, for example, we were pricing an extension, it may be that we need to allow for the plastering of existing external walls. We're provided with helpful blue text that provides further explanations as to when and how we can use this option. Let's put some numbers in. As we've switched the external render wall option on for the first floor walls of our new build, we will notice that as we enter these numbers in, the programme will begin calculating what we need. First, we put in the number of external corners. We can click the question mark. We're provided with a visual reference. We'll put in 2. Now, enter the length of existing external walls to be plastered. We'll put in 5. Next, the height. Let's enter 4. Now we enter in square metres, any deductions for openings. We'll put in 4. The programme now works out the area for us. If, for example, the existing wall is an unusual shape, we can just type the area of it into this box. As mentioned, we don't have existing external walls, and we don't require any plastering on any of our new external walls. We'll look at the external wall items, then we will switch off the external render walls options. External wall items. The NHE Plus has worked out everything we will need to render the external walls that we've entered. Let's take a look at what's been calculated. The labour costs and hours for our rendering are shown here. If we click the question mark, we can see that these costs, along with the associated items, have been worked out based on the rendering being 20mm thick. If we want, we can change this here in the picture. Next, we have our sand. If we click the question mark, we can see that for ordering purposes, this is being rounded up to the nearest tonne. We can use the drop-down menu to adjust the type of sand. For example, depending on the quantity required, we may want to change the type of load we're getting. The blue text here will tell us the number of loads that will be required based on our selection. Here is our cement. Again, we can use the drop-down to change the material. We can also change the mix too. We do have the option to allow for lime. If it was needed, just enter the number of bags in this blue box. Any waterproofer would also need our judgment. Again, if needed, enter the quantity in this blue box. Corner beads are calculated for us. We can click the blue question mark for details of how the programme works these out. The number of lengths needed is based on the length of the corner bead that is selected. So if we adjust the corner bead to one that's a different length, the quantity of lengths required will instantly change. Bell drip beads are also automatically worked out. Okay, so in here we can see the overhang allowance for each opening. We can adjust this. We've also got lots of information about how the programme works the bell drip bead out for us. If we want to allow for exterior surfacing on our external render walls, for example P-shingle, we can. Just switch it on. All the costs and quantities work out. We've also got the option for external cladding mesh. Again, it's just a simple case of turning it on. If any tower scaffold is needed, just check the type of scaffold selected in the drop-down menu, enter the number of days that it will be required, and the number of hours needed to put it up. Everything works out, including the delivery and collection. We don't have any external rendering on our new external walls, and we don't have any existing external walls on our job. So we'll now remove the details from our quote and switch the external rendering off. Floor screed. Any floor screed that is required is worked out here, in its own subsection. We're doing a floating floor on our job, so floor screed isn't required, but we will take a look at how it works, then remove it from our quote. Okay, so first we need to switch the floor screed option on. We just tick this box. Everything's calculated, but we can see how the NHE Plus has worked this out, and fine-tune the details if we want. Okay, so as we can see, this is the area of floor screed that all of these details are based on. If we click this thumbnail, we can see where the programme has got this number from. This visual reference makes it simple. All the possible types of masonry floor construction that could require floor screed are shown. So we've got a concrete slab, oversight, ground floor block and beam, and upper floor block and beam. Below each picture, the programme will show the area, if any, that the quote we're working on has of that type of masonry floor construction. As we can see, we only have an oversight in our quote. The other floor structures all have 0 in their yellow box. We'll also notice that by default, all of the floor types are ticked. This means that if there is an area in the yellow box, the programme will be adding it onto the total area of floor screed that's going to be needed. We only have an oversight, but just to show you, if we untick this, enter the details, then no floor screed will be calculated for this oversight. This is a brilliant feature if you've got more than one type of flooring structure, as you can control exactly what areas will have floor screed. We'll also notice that the area boxes are yellow, so if we want to change them, the area that's automatically brought through, we can. We'll switch the oversight option back on, enter the details. Let's see what's been worked out. The labour for our floor screed is calculated here. We can see the hours and costs. We do have a drop down here. This enables us to adjust the depth of the floor screed, or we can click the question mark. We can also change the depth in the picture, plus we can change the number of hours that will be allowed per square metre. The blue text here explains that if we change the depth of the floor screed, the hours won't automatically adjust. That's why we can change it if we want in the picture. Here is the sand. As we've seen in other sections, we can change how the programme rounds this up. We can also adjust the type of sand in the drop-down menu. The blue text here tells us the number of loads that we'll need. And this blue text reminds us that the labour is allowed above. The quantity of cement for this floor screed is here. If we want, we can adjust the mix. We can allow for insulation and polythene if it's required. If they aren't needed, just switch them off. Reinforcement is switched on, but again, if we don't need it, switch it off. Here's the floor bonding. If we click the question mark, we can change the number of square metres each litre of floor bonding is going to cover. We're also able to switch the floor bonding off if we don't need it. Okay, we don't require any floor screed on our job, so we'll now switch this section off. As we've seen, if it is needed, just switch the section on and tell the programme what areas of the floor structure require it, and simply check the details. Ceilings. The plastering to our ceilings is calculated for us in its own subsection. Let's take a look. We can see what these calculations are based on by clicking this picture. We're provided with a visual reference that shows us where the NHE Plus is getting its measurements from. This picture will show the number of square metres, if any, for intermittent block and beam and timber joist ceilings, as well as the ceilings in any pitched or flat roofs. Any area in ceiling areas is based on what we entered in the first fixed carpentry section of the pricing sheet. If required, we can jump back to this section to review what we entered by clicking this button. We need to tell the programme the ceiling finish that we'll be using. We have the option for plaster or Artex. We will be using plaster, but if I just switch this to Artex, we can see that the material requirements adjust to match our selection. We'll just change this back to plaster. The area of ceilings to be plastered is in a yellow box. So if we want, we can adjust the automatic calculation. The labour and hours for the plastering of our ceilings is here. We have opted for plaster ceilings, so the plaster is worked out. If we click on the question mark, we can see that one bag is set to cover 9 metres square. But we can change this if we want. We're not Artexing, but if we were, we would be able to just click the question mark and adjusting the number of square metres a bag could cover. Scrim tape's here. The blue text in the picture tells us how this is being worked out. We can, if necessary, change the dimensions of the plasterboard. The plasterboard for our ceilings is accounted for in the first fixed carpentry section. By default, coving is switched on. We can see an explanation of how it's worked out by clicking on the question mark. The quantity required is based on lengths, so if we select coving that's a different length, then the quantity will change to match our selection. If we don't want coving, we just click the button to switch it off. Lastly, we've got the coving adhesive. If we switch the coving off, it is automatically removed. So let's switch the coving back on. Instantly it recalculates. If we click the question mark, we can see how the NHE Plus is working this out, and change it if we want. General items. The final subsection of our plastering contains the general items that we will need for the plastering on this job. Let's take a look. Clean-up is allowed. The NHE Plus works that out for us. It looks at the total hours allowed in the whole plastering section, then bases the clean-up time on a percentage of this. If we click the blue question mark, we can read further information on how this is calculated. The percentage allowed is in a yellow box, so we can change it if we want. This task is allocated to a labourer rather than our gang. This is in a drop-down menu, so we can adjust the tradesperson if required. If we don't want to allow for cleaning up here, we can put the percentage to 0. All the costs will be removed. We are going to include cleaning. We are going to include a clean-up, so we will put this back to 1%. The mixer for the mixing of all the sand and cement plaster that's been worked out above is here. The programme's drawn together all of the information from the above subsections and worked out the number of days that a mixer will be required to do all of the plastering in this section. We can view how the programme's worked this out by clicking on the red question mark. We can also change the type of mixer that's being used. The mixer for the floor screed is allowed for here. We looked at the floor screed section, but because our job doesn't require a floor screed, we did switch it off. So no mixer for the floor screed is allowed. If there is a floor screed though, this would be worked out, and we can click the question mark to see how it's being calculated. If we want to allow for a tower scaffold, then we can do so here. Extra row and totals. As we've seen, the plastering section contains all of the common and not so common items and tasks that we may need to allow for in this section of works. When we arrive at the plastering section, much of the work is done for us. We can, if required, allow for additional items or tasks. We just click the Add Extra Row button, located here, and use the straightforward form. If we click the blue info icon, we are provided with details on how to add an extra row. The totals for our plastering are here. They're broken down into plant, materials, hours, labour, and the overall total. We can make this into a PC sum if we want. Just check this box.